Welcome back, college football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and today we get to witness the first ever 12-team college football playoff kickoff, as tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we get to witness Indiana traveling to Notre Dame to play in South Bend for the first ever first-round college football playoff game. This format may not survive too long, but that's not what we're talking about today. What I want to talk to you about today is Indiana Notre Dame again, but dive deeper into some matchups, analytics, tell you what I've learned by looking into these two teams under the microscope, and yeah, let's just get right to it here. Make sure before we begin to like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts, your prediction for this game down in the comment section below. Make sure to watch the video all the way through, and once it's done, let me know whether you agree or disagree with any of the points that I make, any of the analysis that I produce for you. Also, make sure to share this video around to others who love college football. Also, click our link down below in the description or in the top of the comment section in the pinned comment to join our Discord server. We would love to have more Indiana fans, Notre Dame fans, college football fans who just like to talk the sport all the time, 24/7. I would love to have you guys on. So please join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release new college football content. And let's begin. For about a minute and a half, you've seen my original prediction on the screen if you were watching this on YouTube. And it was Indiana 37, Notre Dame 31. And the premise for my original prediction is that Indiana is going to be able to create scoring drives, and that Notre Dame's rushing attack will not completely stopped because I think it's too good to be shut down. It would be slowed down by an Indiana defensive line, linebacker group, and really defense overall that is top 5 unanimously in rushing defense, whether it's college football nerds with their advanced analytics, they have Indiana with the 5th best rushing defense, or just straight up statistics with no strength of schedule adjustments that place Indiana inside the top 2 at number 2 or number 1 in rushing defense. I think that that is a matchup right there that essentially determines the game, and I believe that Indiana, or believed at least, will be able to slow down Notre Dame's rushing attack. Fourth quarter adjustments will be the icing on the cake and decide what is going to be a very close affair, and Indiana will beat Notre Dame because the Hoosiers are balanced, while Notre Dame is very specific, almost to a point of one-dimensionality. So that was my original prediction, just my original prediction here. I like to start things off talking about what I believed my prediction was going to be, or maybe what's more sensical is what I initially thought, like my initial reaction to this game. But now I want to dive a little bit deeper here and review some things, and then also get into some things that I learned. So what do the power ratings say? The power ratings say that Notre Dame is one of the best teams in the country, and that while Indiana is top 15, top 10, that the Fighting Irish are ultimately the better football squad here. Now, FPI specifically has Notre Dame winning this game by 9.6 points. S&P Plus has Notre Dame winning by 5.4. Kelly Ford has Notre Dame winning by 8.9. The College Football Insider's power ratings from Parker Fleming has Notre Dame winning by 4.3. College Football Nerds model has Indiana winning by 0.8 in a very close affair, but low scoring. And My Potential Power Index has Notre Dame winning by 2.5. All of these metrics, except for College Football Nerds, factor in home field advantage. My Potential Power rating agrees with College Football Nerds that Indiana on a neutral field would beat Notre Dame, but the home field advantage added in makes my model predict that, well, Indiana would cover, but Notre Dame would win in a close scoring affair. So a one-score or at least single-digit win for Notre Dame is what the power ratings on average are predicting here, anywhere from maybe Indiana winning in a very close affair to Notre Dame winning by maybe at the most two scores, 2 possessions, 10 points about. That's what the power ratings say, and I find it interesting that you have anywhere from Notre Dame favored by 9.6 points according to FPI, to College Football Nerds model favoring/picking Indiana to win by 0.8. It's a range of like 10 points right there. So all these models have their own inputs, the things that they weigh more heavily than other things. I like College Football Nerds model because it factors in matchups. I like my model because it's my model, but also FPI has been one of the more accurate models of the past few years and also this season. I like to look at FPI as sort of a benchmark. Let's go into how dominant these teams are, the analytics behind them. The reality is for these two teams that they are some of the more complete teams in college football. College Football Nerds said that on their preview that I watched all the way through, and I thought that was a really good point. They also have been some of the more dominant teams in the country. Their strengths of schedule are pretty similar. Notre Dame, their worst 11 games are better than Indiana's worst 11, but Indiana's played Ohio State. No one Notre Dame has played is even close to the caliber of OSU. Really, with pretty equal strengths of schedule, I think you can take a lot of these analytics at face value and you don't have to do much adjusting for them. That's just my personal opinion. You look at the 0.346 points per play margin for Indiana. That means for every one play that Indiana runs compared to every one play their opponent runs, Indiana outscores their opponent 0.346 more points. For Notre Dame, it's 0.422, which is just, it's insane. You watch Notre Dame football play, and they're a dominant team who quickly snowballs against their opponents and bullies them into the ground. They did that against the service academies, against Georgia Tech, eventually against Texas A&M it worked. I mean, in every game that Notre Dame has won, the strategy has been they simply outlast their opponent and or bully them. The expected points added margin, this doesn't relate to how many points you're actually scoring, but more so what you're expected to score, really in regards to field position here. Notre Dame has a 0.229 expected points added margin. Indiana's is 0.211. When you look at yards per point margin, Indiana is 6 there, not 6th, but just a 6 yards per point margin. Notre Dame is an 11.3 yards per point margin right there. Indiana has a 6. So that's an area where Indiana is not top 5, rarely in more, advanced scoring offense analytics. Notre Dame, meanwhile, is high up there. You look at offensive and defensive success rate. I found this to be very fascinating, and it's something that when looking at other analytics and watching these two teams play, it plays out. Indiana has a 51.6% offensive success rate, which is first. Their defensive success rate is a 35.4, which is 6th. Notre Dame in those categories, 45.3% offensive success rate, that's 27th, and 8th in defensive success rate with a 36%. Indiana does a better job at winning the down-to-down battle compared to Notre Dame. But what I will also tell you when watching these teams is Notre Dame is very explosive, and their explosivity has sometimes compensated for maybe more failed plays than what Indiana has. Meanwhile, Indiana doesn't fail on as many plays, but they don't typically get the same type of explosives that Notre Dame does, both on offense and on defense. Indiana doesn't get the same amount of pick sixes, the same amount of turnovers produced, and they don't have the same type of long runs, the explosive game-breaking runs that Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price have. That Notre Dame and their offensive line, running backs, and offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock are able to scheme and produce. Indiana doesn't. They don't do that. Indiana is much more of a methodical team. And what also makes it interesting is in the yards per play margin, how many yards per play you average on offense and minus how many yards per play you allow on defense. These teams aren't that different here. 2.1 yards per play margin for Indiana. Notre Dame is just a little bit higher at 2.2. Notre Dame's offense produces more yards per play than IU's, but IU's defense is better at preventing their opponents from averaging anywhere from good to all right or just sustainable yards per play compared to Notre Dame's defense. In game control, Indiana ranks 7th. In average in-game win probability, they are 1st nationally, which is surprising because Ohio State, we all know what they were able to do to Indiana, but the reality of that Ohio State game as well was that Indiana was in that game for a half or at least a quarter And even though it felt like they were out of it in the second quarter, there were opportunities where they could have come back. And it was a really weird game because Indiana's defense did very well, but their special teams was horrible and their offense couldn't get anything going. It's still weird to see Indiana first in that category, though. I think it shows kind of how down of a year this is. Also shows that Indiana's strength of schedule just isn't that strong, guys. And it's the same thing with Notre Dame here. Their average in-game win probability rank is second. And the only reason it's behind Indiana is probably because Notre Dame was in a close affair with USC and A&M to bookend the year, and they lost to NIU. Meanwhile, for Indiana, they have a better loss, and the only other game where they were in a close and competitive affair was, I'm going to say, Michigan for a half, not even for a full game. Notre Dame is also fourth in game control, though. So in terms of game control, Notre Dame's ahead. Average in-game win probability is just like a different way of measuring game control. They're pretty similar. So these two teams are similar. I think the best thing to say in regards to these teams is that Notre Dame simply is better in scoring offense and scoring defense. Indiana is better in total offense and total defense. Just as a summary, of course, in different metrics in those categories, IU is better than Notre Dame, or Notre Dame is better than IU. And scoring is obviously important. It is. And that's something that I think favors Notre Dame here just in terms of straight up metrics. But metrics also aren't everything. You have to watch the games. You have to take into account multiple factors, different positions, different matchups. And that's what we're going to do right now. So looking at these teams here, I believe Indiana has the better head coach. I have been impressed by Marcus Freeman this year. The NIU loss looks more like a fluke and an aberration than anything else. This is in stark contrast to 2022, where they lost to Marshall, but then lost to Stanford again, two teams that were horrific in comparison to Notre Dame. And they also got their defense just totally destroyed by USC that year. And also even, well, South Carolina, they threw 2 pick sixes. But that year was kind of very up and down for Notre Dame. 2023 was better, but you had those Clemson and Louisville losses that were just in stark contrast to the Ohio State game, where Notre Dame should have won. They didn't, but they should have won that game. Ohio State deserved the win, but Notre Dame put themselves in a position to win and just couldn't do it. This year, they lost to NIU, but they've been dominating everyone else, and they, I will say, have been one of the most, if not the most, dominant team in all of college football right now. This is such an NCAA 14 year, in the NCAA 14 video game, or even in the more recent video game that I don't play as much, but I have a few months ago, just stopped because for whatever reason I didn't like it. Maybe a controversial opinion there. But you know how sometimes the good teams beat everyone else, but then they lose to this small random team, but they're dominant in every other way? That's Notre Dame. That's Notre Dame. Like, they, in a lot of ways, I think, are kind of like almost a video game team. They're just video game caliber dominant, which is very good. And then they had that one random loss that's like, does this even matter? Like, should we include this in the sample size? Or is this like a big part of their identity that no one else has just been able to exploit? I think Indiana has the better head coach, circling back to my original point, because I think that Indiana has much less talent, a similar caliber schedule, and they've been more fundamentally sound. I mean, they're better in penalties. They have a higher special teams efficiency. And, I mean, honestly, if I give you two teams who are 11-1, one lost to OSU, and the other team lost to NIU, and the team who lost to NIU never played a caliber of OSU's team, a team that is a caliber or similar caliber to OSU, my apologies for the mix-up of words, who would you say is the better coached team? Especially when you look at the penalties, and Indiana is better. And when you look at the talent difference, I mean, Notre Dame has a lot more talent than Indiana does blue chip-wise, and yet these teams are as similar as they are. So I'm going to go with Curt Cignetti, but I've been impressed with Marcus Freeman. I think he has been getting better and better every year, and he's put Notre Dame in a prime position, I think, to win their first national championship in quite some time. This team is that good. Offensively, I have to go with Mike Denbrock over Tino Sansuri. Defensively is interesting. It's more complex, I think, than offense. I think both of these offensive staffs are pretty good. In fact, elite, some of the best in the nation. But Mike Denbrock was the best offensive coordinator in the nation last year, or at least one of the best. I think that, Kotelnicki and Will Stein can contend for both best last year and also best this season, but Denbrock can as well. And I think that on the defensive side of the ball, you have Bryant Haynes for Indiana, also Curt Cignetti. His time at James Madison was more reflected by dominant defense than, let's say, dominant offense. And then you have Al Golden for Notre Dame. And I do think that from what I have watched this season, that the effort that Indiana has put forth on defense and the scheme and the development and the way the players play together, the cohesion of that unit is better. I do think that Indiana consequentially is a better defensive staff, but for Notre Dame, their offense creates explosives and they have a better offensive coordinator in my mind. I, go back to Indiana and Notre Dame here, and you might think, based off of the numbers or how these teams have been maybe earlier in the year, that Notre Dame's more defensive and Indiana's more offensive. I think there's a chance it might be the opposite here, where Notre Dame's more of an offensive team if you have to choose one or the other, and Indiana's more of a defensive team. In run blocking and pass blocking, I got to go with the Irish here. Their offensive line is just better, plain and simple, and their rushing offense is also better. Notre Dame right now is averaging well over 6 yards per carry on the ground, 6.2, 6.3 actually yards per carry, which is second, and they average 224.8 rushing yards per game, which is 11th. Indiana's outside the top 50 in both of those categories. We'll get to a fact later where Indiana actually has a really good short run game, but they do not have the same explosivity nor the same offensive line that Notre Dame has. In passing offense, it's Indiana. There's no question about it. Look at the analytics. In run defense, I would pick Indiana. Pass defense, I would pick Notre Dame, although another factoid we'll talk about later in this video, I'm a little bit shaky on Notre Dame's passing defense. It's statistically really, 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 really good. But there's an analogy that I think many of you will like, especially since whether you're an Indiana fan or a Notre Dame fan, you're around Big Ten country. I think you'll understand this analogy at the end of the video that I want to share with you all. A hint, it's something to do with the 2022 college football playoff and the only upset of that year. You should understand that. When it comes to the outside edge on defense and the inside edge, I like Indiana more. I think Indiana is more aggressive, is very aggressive, and they're good at it. I think that their DBs, their linebackers, their defensive line, they're all fast, they're athletic, they're strong. When I talk about outside and inside edge, a lot of that is in relationship to pass rush and more so up front than anything else. Like, are you going to be able to get to the perimeter very quickly? Or are you going to be able to generate really a lot of inside pressure or stoppage? And I think Indiana is really good up front in run defense, and also they can be really good at pass rush. They're a really aggressive team that isn't to take away anything from Notre Dame's defense, by the way. Notre Dame's defense is really, really good, and they do have more X-factor players than Indiana does, and they also have more reliable depth, and a lot of that has to do with not just recruiting, but also the fact that, like Indiana, Notre Dame has really good position coaches who are very good at developing. For example, I look at Notre Dame's Joe Rudolph. He's one of the best offensive line coaches in all of college football. Moving on to the players, I would take quarterback Kurtis Rourke over quarterback Riley Leonard, even though Riley Leonard has gotten better as the year has gone on, and this should be encouraging if you're a Notre Dame fan because he's peaking at the right time. I would take Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love over Indiana's Justice Ellison, Tyson Lawton, Kalen Black. Notre Dame has a deeper running back room, but also more importantly, much more talented and explosive and consistent with their two deep. At wide receiver, this is no question. Indiana, Elijah Sarratt, Miles Cross, Miles Price, Kashawn Williams, and Omar Cooper Jr. Omar Cooper Jr. and Kashawn Williams are rotational players. They're not technically starters. They would start over anyone in Notre Dame's wide receiver room. Bo Collins, Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Harrison, Chris Mitchell, and Jaden Thomas. A lot of Jadens in that room, which is kind of cool and interesting. I think that they have some people who can be good in that wide receiver room for Notre Dame, but Indiana's wide receiver room is one alien player away. Like, if you put Jeremiah Smith in that Indiana wide receiver room, it'd be the best in the nation. And while Jeremiah Smith is an elite player and an alien, because of how many wide receivers are on the field, one alien player doesn't make your wide receiver room an elite wide receiver room. Indiana's literally one of their players away from being an alien, from being the best wide receiver room in the country. They're not Oregon, they're not Ole Miss, they're not Ohio State caliber, but that's not because they're thinner at wide receiver than those teams. They're not. They just don't have a Tez Johnson. They don't have a Trey Harris. They don't have a Jeremiah Smith. They don't have that caliber of player. They have a really good wide receiver room. At tight end, I would take Mitchell Evans of Notre Dame, who's now healthy, thank goodness, over Zach Horton. I would take on the offensive line, center and guard for Notre Dame, which is Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, and you also have Billy Scruth and Sam Pendleton in the rotation. I'd take them over Tyler Steffens, Mike Katic, and Bray Lynch, even though I really like Mike Katic at center. For tackle, I would take Trey Wedig and also Carter Smith over Notre Dame's Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner. Although tackle for Notre Dame is still pretty good, and Notre Dame is one of the better teams, if not the best team in the nation, running off tackle in the country, and they're very good at running up the middle too. They just have the best rushing offense in the nation, no doubt, resides in South Bend. You take a look on defense here for these teams. Indiana, I think at defensive tackle, has depth, and they have size too, particularly with C.J. West there. C.J. West, Tyrique Tucker, James Carpenter, and Marcus Burris Jr., I would take right now over Howard Cross III and Riley Mills. A part of that's actually depth, and the fact that I think Indiana is fresher there than Notre Dame is. They can rotate and not drop off a ton, but I also legitimately think their starters are close to the same caliber as Notre Dame's there. Maybe that's a delusional take. I say that because Howard Cross III and Riley Mills are viewed as NFL defensive tackles, but efficiency-wise, Indiana's have been better this year than Notre Dame's have at defensive tackle. At D-end, Indiana's got Michael Kamara, and they also have Linnell Carr Jr. and Andrew Turvey. I would take them over R.J. Oben and also Bryce Young, Joshua Burnham in that defensive end, and also a jack position for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. But again, especially when it comes to these teams on defense, but also on offense, outside of maybe Indiana's guard play and Notre Dame's wide receiver play, all of these players I'm talking about, all these position groups are at minimum good/great, and some of them are elite. At linebacker, I would take Indiana there yet again, but this is just, it's very razor thin because Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Asbury, that's an elite linebacker room. But Jalen Walker, Aiden Fisher, Isaiah Jones, they've been a great linebacker room as well. I love the pursuit that they have. Corner, I would take over Indiana, I would take Indiana over Notre Dame, though I imagine if Benjamin Morrison was healthy for Notre Dame, I think I would definitely be picking the Fighting Irish there, because Notre Dame has performed very well at corner. They're just a hair behind Indiana. I love D'Angelo Pons. I love Jameer Johnson. For Notre Dame, Christian Gray and Leonard Moore have done well, or Leonard Moore, maybe is how you say his name. But I just think Indiana's a step ahead there. Safety? I will tell you, Indiana actually once again graded out as better than Notre Dame here at safety. But I don't think that Indiana has an Xavier Watts. And Adon Schuler and Jordan Clark have also been good at that position. So I will take them and actually override my model and the efficiency metrics that I'm seeing over Shawn Asbury II, Amari Farrell, and Terry Jones Jr. Maybe that's a mistake. Maybe Indiana's safeties play better in this game, but having an alien player in a position is very important, and Notre Dame has that in Xavier Watts in a way that Indiana does not have that at safety. And as for special teams, Nicholas Radicic has made well over 50%, if not over, definitely over 75% of his field goals. Meanwhile, for the Fighting Irish, their kickers haven't even made 50% of their field goals. Notre Dame's special teams is awful. Indiana's has recently been bad, but they haven't reached awful at a consistency that Notre Dame has on the special teams side of things. Very quickly, let's go and look at these different position groups, Notre Dame's defense versus Indiana's offense. Then we'll switch it, Indiana's defense versus Notre Dame's offense. We already talked about all the players of the different position groups, so I imagine that, you can fill these out based off of how I've explained this, and also for the sake of time, I don't want to spend, 10 minutes on each of these like I have in the past. But it's safe to say, and keep in mind that Notre Dame's defense shows 12 players on the field. Obviously, you can't have 12 players on the field, but Notre Dame does run some multiple looks. Sometimes they'll have 3 linebackers. Sometimes they'll have 5 defensive backs and switch out there. Or maybe I'm not super familiar with Notre Dame's scheme, but maybe sometimes 3 down linemen. I don't know. All I know for Notre Dame schematic wise is that they do run kind of a multiple defense with different looks, and they can do that because they have a lot of depth and they have a lot of talent. It's just something that Al Golden wants to do. But looking at these units here, some things to pay attention to. Indiana's left guard, that's Tyler Steffens. He's been a liability, and ever since Bray Lynch has gone down at left guard, this IU offensive line has just regressed straight up. And also, against the best competition, Indiana's offensive line has not been good in pass protection. In run blocking, they've actually been pretty solid, pretty good, actually, I'd say. Their run blocking did well in the short game against Michigan and also against Ohio State. But the problem was the pass blocking, especially as the game progressed, really fell apart against those two teams. The tackles for Indiana, 81 and 85, Carter Smith and Trey Wedig, I think they match up well against a Notre Dame defensive end group, Josh Burnham, and also you got R.J. Oben, that have had some production, but Notre Dame's real strength on the D-line, I think, is their defensive tackle unit. Howard Cross, the third, and Riley Mills. Curtis Rourke has been amazing this year, and with receivers like Elijah Sarratt, Omar Cooper Jr., Keshawn Williams, Miles Cross, and Miles Price, they're going up against a Notre Dame secondary that is ranked here. All these ratings are provided by Pro Football Focus, by the way. All of them are rated in the 70s, and you see the 85 is obviously Xavier Watts there at free safety. They haven't been tested all that much. And what's interesting to me is you have matchups at wide receiver for Indiana that by grades are actually favorable, or at least balanced against a Notre Dame secondary that is number one in the country. They are. They're number one. And a huge part of that's the fact they only allow their opponents to complete 48% of their passes on him. Curtis Rourke's the best quarterback they've faced by a mile. And his running back is a weighted average of Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton for the most part. They're good. And they have a lot of depth at running back. And Justice Ellison especially, he falls forward for yards, and he has a little bit of a burst to him too, where if he gets an open space, he isn't gone, but he can find open space and create some things with his shiftiness. Linebacker for Notre Dame, clear strength. You got, obviously, Jack Kaiser. You have Jalen Sneed, who was a 5-star who went to Notre Dame there, and also Drake Bowen, another younger player, talented player out of high school, who's doing rather well. I like Notre Dame here defensively to not get a guaranteed ton of pressure on Rourke, but they will probably get some pressure on Rourke. And I also think that Notre Dame's defense isn't going to obviously get blown over by this Indiana offense because of some of those liabilities in pass protection, but also because Indiana don't have necessarily an alien at any position to break the game open. Indiana's offense, their success is predicated on having successful plays over and over and over again because they rarely get explosives, especially in Big Ten Conference play against better competition, or at least mediocre competition. So that is an advantage that Notre Dame has. But what Indiana has here is I believe that the Hoosiers will be able to run the ball a fair amount. They won't blow up Notre Dame's rushing defense, but there are a lot of favorable matchups grading-wise, and also Indiana is in the 90th percentile, which is a very good thing in terms of power running. So I think Indiana will be able to have some success against this Notre Dame D line at running the ball. I think Notre Dame, if they want to take away Indiana's rushing offense totally, will have to stack the box here. And I also look at these receivers against Notre Dame's secondary. This is the best QB and best receiving core that Notre Dame's played all season long. It's even better than USC's. Indiana's deeper at wide receiver than USC was. They didn't have the same athleticism, but they have a lot more accurate of a QB than anyone USC's had all season to deliver the ball. So probably less opportunities for pick sixes, which Notre Dame's had a lot this year, and more opportunities for Curtis Rourke to throw one-on-one balls that only his receivers can catch. So this will be a test for a statistically elite Notre Dame secondary. We'll see how they put up against it, and also a test against an Indiana offensive line that against two elite D lines, Michigan the best in the nation, Ohio State top 5, really struggled. I don't think Notre Dame has the same caliber of D line or really even close to Michigan's, probably not OSU's either, but it's the third best D line, or maybe the fourth best if you think Nebraska's is better, that IU's played all season long. So what IU O-line shows up? The one against Nebraska or the one against Michigan in the second half and Ohio State for the whole game? That'll be a big tale of how this game unfolds. You look at Indiana's defense against Notre Dame's offense. Something that jumps out to me here is that Indiana's front may actually have not a straight-up dominant advantage, but they will be able to make some plays against this Notre Dame offensive line, especially in regards to pass protection. If Notre Dame has to lean on their passing offense, that's not going to be a good thing, because Indiana does have a good pass rush, a good D-line. They're aggressive and are willing to send pressure. And I imagine that while Riley Leonard can create some plays, look at the grades of his receivers there. There's not much of an advantage there against an Indiana secondary that, while not as talented or as big as Notre Dame's, is still playing their hearts out and is still very efficient, and they don't make many mistakes. The non-negotiable here for Notre Dame is the interior of that offensive line and their running back, and also Riley Leonard's legs. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price average out to an 87. Leonard's an 88. You look at tight end. Mitchell Evans has been good. He's not the typical NFL first-round tight end that Notre Dame has had and relied on in the past. He's not like, let's say, Michael Mayer. He's not that. But he is good. I'm interested to see how he factors into this game. I think PFF's actually underrating him a bit at 66. You look at nose tackle, that right there for Indiana is C.J. West and Tyrique Tucker. That is their larger defensive tackle. Their best defensive tackles are right there. And their defensive end spot where Michael Kamara is, not the 90 grade, that's another strong suit. And then at linebacker, you have, Aiden Fisher for Indiana. You also have Jalen Walker. So this front is really, really strong. And that's a matchup that I'm fascinated to see, is how do these teams operate in the trenches? Not just Indiana trying to protect against Notre Dame's defensive front, but also Notre Dame's offensive front trying to run the ball against Indiana's defensive front, which, even when you adjust for opponents in that weak strength of schedule, they still get a top 5 rushing defense, and it's very impressive what they do. Their safeties tackle well, their corners do if need be, they're aggressive at linebacker and the defensive line. The fundamental soundness that Curt Cignetti has pounded into this program, combined with the talent that exists on defense, most of Indiana's X-Factor players, I do believe, are on the defensive side of the ball, makes for a lethal defense. I do like Notre Dame. I do like them in certain matchups off tackle, because Indiana's defensive line is elite, but they're better, I believe, on the interior of the D-line, or at least deeper than the exterior. On the exterior, they basically have Mikail, I don't know why I thought of Alvin Kamara, but Mikail Kamara, and that's it. If they can maybe run away from him, I wonder if, with the help of their tight ends and also Leonard's legs, that maybe they can break off some good runs here, especially with how aggressive Indiana's defense is. But we'll have to see. All I know is that Notre Dame has to run the ball here, because looking at these receivers for Notre Dame, without advanced schematics, which Mike Denbrock is capable of making, he's capable of scheming at an elite level. He has all season long. But without that, and Indiana breaking down in pass defense, Notre Dame will not consistently pass in this Indiana defense. They have to successfully run the ball. And I believe that they think they can. So moving on, We'll get to the good, the meh, and the ugly for both teams, and then get to my final prediction. The good for Indiana. They're fundamentally sound and they minimize mistakes. They tackle at an elite level, and they have good pursuit and speed everywhere on defense. They have a powerful speed rush from the defensive line, especially Kamara, and their linebackers help in that as well. They have good hands at defensive back, like wonderful at pass deflections. D'Angelo Pons is an undersized DB, but he makes up for that in passion, in athleticism, and also they have high football IQ. Indiana does a very good job, I think, at reading offenses and trying their best to defend them. The Ohio State game, for example, the only reason OSU is able to consistently move the ball is because they had Jeremiah Smith, and they have those X-factor receivers that match up well with Indiana's lack of size at DB. That was the matchup there. But Notre Dame doesn't have that. In fact, most teams outside of OSU and maybe Oregon, or maybe you want to say Texas if they get things going, or maybe Penn State if you're talking about warring against those DBs, not many have that in college football, even in the college football playoff. Their offensive line and running backs produce an elite power run. Specifically, it's 93rd percentile in the FBS. It's one of the best power rushing attacks in college football. It's a lot like Michigan's last year, where Michigan last year did not have the same explosivity on the ground that they had in 21 and 22, but they were very consistent on, 4th and 1, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, 4th and 2, being able to run the football and get the necessary yards to create a successful play on a short rushing attack. And Curtis Rourke is accurate, he's strong, and the wide receivers are reliable in terms of depth but also play. The neutral for IU, the meh, is they don't have an alien wide receiver or running back to bust the game open, to create those explosive plays. So every drive will likely have to be methodical unless Notre Dame messes up in a big way. The ugly is that against Michigan and Ohio State, the offensive line, especially in pass blocking, was neutered. Consequently, the passing offense was slowed down or annihilated. They're inconsistent at getting pressure without blitzes. The defensive line only creates about 72% of the sacks. It's not as bad as, let's say, Ohio State's, but Indiana is aggressive in part because they need to be aggressive, because that maximizes their strengths. Notre Dame might be able to take advantage of that. It will be hard because they don't have the receivers, but they do have Mitchell Evans at tight end, and maybe if they run into a blitz and maybe slip a tackle or block very well, they could create a big play off of that. That's an ugly for Indiana potentially. And they also have issues stopping opponents in the red zone. They do. They have problems there where they're outside the top 25 in opponent red zone scoring percentage allowed. For Notre Dame, the good is running backs Love and Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are non-negotiables there. They have elite offensive line play, particularly on the interior. Riley Leonard is improving as the year goes on. The linebacker room is deep and commands the field. They have 5 forced fumbles and 6 sacks at linebacker. Very impressive. And as we talked about, they're so deep there that they can run a multiple defense where maybe they have 2 linebackers on the field or 3. The D-line is full of veterans and future NFL players, especially at D-tackle, and Xavier Watts is an alien. The neutral for the Irish is their secondary is talented, but it's not been challenged. And I think that this is a part where I'm slowing down very briefly, and then we'll get back to it. I want to read a statistic to you that if you're a Notre Dame fan, should make you at least prepare for Indiana scoring, and if you're an Indiana fan, should make you excited. Notre Dame is second in opponent yards per pass attempt, allowing 5.6. Their opponents only complete 48.68% of their throws, which is first. Their opponent average team pass rating is a 94.1, also first. Well, what do you think their opponent yards per completion is? It should probably be top 10, right? You'd be wrong. It's 11.4. When opponents complete passes against Notre Dame, they gain a first down every time, on average. They're outside the top 30 in that statistic, and they faced Zach Pyron at Georgia Tech, Bryson Daly, Blake Horvath. They faced multiple QBs who are maybe good at running the ball, which is why I think their rushing defense might be better than the analytics suggest. But they have not faced a competent passing QB outside of Tyler Shaw and Jaden Maiava. And maybe I'm forgetting another one, but the NIU QB they played, I think Ethan Hampton was his name, he might be one of the best QBs they've played on their schedule. I mean, this secondary's not been tested at all. They haven't. And when they've gotten close to being tested, like against USC, it's looked like at times they've folded. So I think Notre Dame's secondary is strong. It's not the non-negotiable, in my view, that people think it is. At least that's my opinion. It's a bold prediction. Could be a hot take. That's my opinion, though. The ugly is they're extremely one-dimensional on offense. They average 6.3 yards per carry, but 7.2 yards per attempt passing, which is just below average. They're really good, though, at running the ball, obviously. They produce turnovers. They average about 1 turnover given up per game, and they rely a lot on turnovers to score, which can be a problem in these big games. And they have not seen an elite team all season long. Finally, 10 reasons why both teams can win. For Indiana, an elite D-line and number 1 rushing offense. Number 2, their elite coaching. Number 3, physical and fast linebackers. Number 4, disciplined DBs. Number 5 is their power rushing attack. Number 6 is they are better at fundamentals than Notre Dame is. Number 7 is their quarterback Curtis Rourke. 8th is their wide receiver room. 9th is their offensive line, because its best game is a good game, and if it brings their best, well, maybe some of the other reasons don't even matter, but it's a big if. And number 10 is they're more battle-tested. They've played a team like Ohio State who's top 5. Notre Dame hasn't even played a team close to the top 10 all season long. For Notre Dame, number 1, it's their elite offensive line, especially at run blocking. Number 2 is Jeremiah Love, an alien running back. Number 3 is their X-Factor deep linebacker core. Number 4, their defensive tackle room is healthy. They have NFL players there that could present problems for Indiana's offensive line. 5th is Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, and the game plan that he will bring. 6th is an aggressive passing defense. We've talked about how it might be weaker than people think, but they are still good at forcing turnovers and still one of the better passing defenses nationally, I do believe. 7th, Riley Leonard's legs. 8th, Mitchell Evans, and the fact that he might give them enough of a receiving presence to confuse Indiana's defense. 9th is their talent edge, and 10th is their home field advantage. So my revised prediction here, taking all of this in, looking at the reasons why these teams can win, looking at the good for these teams, the bad, the things that could be good but also you don't necessarily know in the matchups, I'm going to make this prediction lower scoring. I think these defenses are too good to allow each other to score in, let's say, like both the 30s or high 30s. More importantly, it's going to snow. So even though these offenses, I think, have some advantages against these defenses, it's going to be snowing, it's going to be cold. People, I still don't think, have fully processed the clock rules from 2023 taking in effect. Indiana loves to slow the game down, and Notre Dame is a physical team who loves to run the ball as well. They like to game control too. My revised prediction is Indiana 30, Notre Dame 21. I think that Indiana will be able to pass on Notre Dame's aggressive DBs. This is something I was questioning a bit before, where I thought that IU would score 37 points, but maybe hit some passes, be able to run consistently. I've revised my prediction to the point where, well, I thought Indiana would have a good passing effort against Notre Dame's secondary. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they'll actually have a great game through the air against this secondary, as long as their offensive line can block. If their O-line can block, I think Curtis Rourke will have a great game against this Notre Dame secondary, because he's poised, he's accurate, and his receivers are good, and Notre Dame has not played a team like Indiana all season long. Their rushing attack for the Irish will be slowed down by IU's defensive line, but I still think they'll be able to score on some rushing plays and be able to run the ball for, let's say, like 4 yards per carry, maybe even 5, but IU won't let them get a lot of explosives and create some negative plays on the ground and get Notre Dame off schedule. And finally, Indiana's balance beats Notre Dame's secondary. Indiana's the more diverse team. They're the more fundamentally sound team. Notre Dame is pure specificity. They are like the person who, in their room, is locked up and is mining Bitcoin and is making a lot of money. And they're very successful in this specific area. But they're, let's say, I don't know. Like, they're very good at one thing. They're locked in the room, they're earning money, making Bitcoin, providing for their family. But then they have these other weaknesses too, like they don't get enough sunlight outside, for example. It might be a bad analogy. The point being, their passing offense is not good. I don't know how elite their defense is. The only thing I know about Notre Dame is they have the nation's best rushing offense, but they cannot rely on their passing game to win games. IU can rely on their passing attack, even their rushing attack in power situations, and any part of their defense to win football games. And with that, I'm going with Indiana to win 30-21. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Carlo OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Taylor Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Turgensen, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Check out my merchandise store and Patreon page via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment if you want to support the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Go Irish and go Hoosiers. I'll see you all very soon.